So good morning once again, everybody, and we are now live on YouTube. So good morning to everybody who's just joining us via YouTube and indeed via Facebook, I believe, as well. So welcome to this second part of the Social Platform's Flagship Conference of 2021. My name is Heather Roy and I'm a member of the Management Committee of Social Platform, and I've been given the task, indeed the pleasure, of moderating our event today. This is the second day, as I said, of Social Platform's Flagship Conference. Yesterday we had a number of interventions and also a number of workshops led by members of the Social Platform, and we'll hear more about those later today. The Flagship Conference is the annual civil society gathering of organisations that are advocating for social justice and participatory democracy around Europe. And together with representatives of the EU institutions, of EU member states, and indeed civil society and other stakeholders, the whole ethos of the flagship event is to identify the challenges of the EU's current socio-economic governance models, and then advocating for better coordination between economic and social policies and for structured and meaningful civil dialogue. At the same time, we want to look at how together we can create and develop alternative models and solutions which are more democratic, more people-centred, and leave no one behind in our society. We also want to ensure that we build synergies and develop strategies between governmental and non-governmental actors to achieve a European Union that's based on social justice and participatory democracy. And it is no coincidence that we are holding this flagship event this week, the week of the Porto summit, that will be gathering heads of government, heads of state together to consider what their vision is of social Europe. 3.5 years ago in Gothenburg in Sweden, member states signed and declared the European Pillar of Social Rights. 20 principles that were identified as being essential to ensure social cohesion, social justice, social inclusion, and the reduction of poverty and quality work, decent work for everybody in Europe. 3.5 years have passed, and although we have been pleased to have the pillar, we have, as civil society, as social platform, been calling for actions that will actually match the ambition. It's not enough for the social pillar to be a compass when it comes to European policy. It must also be an action plan that brings constructive changes that affect the lives of people in Europe. And that's why this week we are very pleased to see that there will be the Porto summit and the hope that there will be the adoption of the action plan for the European Pillar of Social Rights with its targets and with its revised social scoreboard. So this morning, we're going to be hearing from a number of speakers about what their hopes are for Porto, what their hopes are for the Pillar of Social Rights going forward, what their hopes are for this idea of new ways of not going back to the same old, but looking at new ways that we can build cohesive, inclusive, barrier-free societies. And to that end, we want to ask you a question to start with. And I believe that we may well have a poll that will be able to come up on the screen at this point. I'm just going to check with our colleagues. Do we? No, we don't. I'm very sorry. We don't have a poll at this moment. So we are going to ask you to put in the chat what are your expectations of the Porto summit? And if you can put that up in the chat, I'll read out some of the answers that we have. So we have a sense of those who are here today, what your expectations are. So we're starting to see some expectations, endorsing the social pillar action plan, to have political commitment to social justice, getting rid of austerity, a social and inclusive Europe. We endorsing the action plan again. Other suggestions, other expectations? Concrete commitments by member states. And I think that's something that we're all hoping will come out of the summit this week, is that we'll go beyond the declaration of principles and we'll actually see the implementation of the principles, and that we can no longer hide behind the principles and imagine those to be action. Protecting minority rights. Indeed, we are all very aware across social platform in its diverse membership that we cannot have proper, inclusive social Europe without removing the barriers that affect many people on a discrimination level, on a gender level, on an identity level. And indeed, we're now seeing comments about ensuring that inclusion of migrants and the integration of migrants is included as part of the action of the action plan. Ensuring that the momentum keeps going, ensuring that the social economy is seen as a different way of doing business that is more inclusive and more participatory and more just. Indeed, the questions around a green transition and how do we have a green transition and a digital transition that is also a social transition, a three-pillar approach, is something I think that many in social platform are keen to see as part of the discussions coming up later this week. More attention to transversal issues such as discrimination, administrative status, and precariousness has also been put in the chat. So we have many great expectations for the coming few days. And I really believe that we're at a sort of crossroads in Europe, that if we do not see a positive outcome in Porto and in the subsequent discussions, for example, in the European Council, then we will be questioning what is Europe for. And we have seen recently how many Europeans are keen to see a social Europe. And as we also see the launch of the conference on the future of Europe next week, the whole coming together of people's vision of Europe is something that's very close to all our minds at this point. So thank you for your suggestions. There are still many more there. Elderly patient healthcare systems, more attention to Roma, commitment to the circular economy, they're all there. So we have many, many expectations. And I'm going to turn now to our first speaker to maybe give some reflection on these many expectations and what social platform is looking for. And at this stage, I have to let everybody know that there has been a change to our programme this morning. And Minister Giovannini from Italy, who was due to give our keynote speech, has unfortunately been unable to attend due to a pressing matter in Italy. So we do not have him with us this morning, but we do have many, many other speakers, and they will be able to give us their input on what we are looking at this morning. The way that we're going to work is we'll hear from all of our speakers. I might push them a little bit on their interventions. They've been given 7 minutes to give us their perspective on Porto and on social Europe and the theme of this flagship conference. Depending on what they say, I might ask them some questions, but once they've all spoken, we will open the floor to everybody participating, the nearly 100 people participating this morning, for you to ask questions as well. And so we will be using the chat function for you to pose your questions. Please also, for a little bit of housekeeping, keep yourself on mute unless you are the speaker, so that we can hear everybody clearly. You can also tweet during this event, and the hashtag for this event is Building Social Europe. So please, if you hear something that's interesting to you, that challenges you, please tweet it and use that hashtag. So I'm going to turn first to our speaker this morning, which is Piotr Sadowski, known to many of us as President of Social Platform, originally from Poland, but a great Anglophile these days, living in London and with a fantastic British accent. We are looking forward to hearing from him how Social Platform sees Porto, how Social Platform is looking towards this new idea, new commitment to a social Europe. So Piotr, can I ask you to take the floor and tell us about that? And then later we'll come back to what the platform members have been saying in the workshops yesterday. The floor is yours. And I'll perhaps ask our technical support if they could spotlight Piotr so we can see him in the full screen.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Heather. I think I need to ask the host to start my video. Great, thank you. Heather, thank you very much. Good morning to all of you, dear friends. Few of us have experienced more challenging times than the last year in the context of a crisis which has not been selective and has impacted on all of us. Of course, the pandemic has not hit all people equally. The social and economic consequences are the most severe for people in vulnerable situations and people who are already at risk of or are indeed experiencing poverty and social exclusion. So this is a very timely moment for our flagship event to take place and to bring together EU institutions, member states representatives, civil society organizations, and social partners to discuss together how to pave the way for Europe's recovery, ensuring no one is left behind. Heather mentioned Gothenburg in November 2017. So when we all met there, we were coming out of a socio-economic crisis which impacted on so many groups of people, and especially those living in vulnerable situations. We proclaimed the European Pillar of Social Rights as the compass and an action plan to build a social Europe. But we waited nearly 4 years for the actual action plan and for the next social summit. So we really welcome the upcoming social summit in Porto and the fact that the Portuguese presidency has made it happen. And we call for annual social summits to take place going forward. The action plan will be the implementation guide for the pillar. And ahead of the social summit on Friday, I would like to outline Social Platform's reactions and recommendations with regards to the action plan. I would like to start by speaking about the plan and its interdependence coherency with other policies and frameworks. Challenges related to rising inequalities, digitalization, climate change, and demographic change, just to name a few, are all strongly interdependent. For them to be addressed efficiently, macroeconomic, fiscal, employment, social and environmental measures must be balanced and mutually supportive. Therefore, Social Platform advocates for changes in the EU socio-economic governance system, including the European semester process, to ensure a much better balance of these priorities. For now, it remains unclear how all the EU's ongoing and upcoming thematic strategies and initiatives, as well as broader frameworks such as the Agenda 2030, its SDGs, and the European Green Deal, will work together to contribute to the same objectives. Therefore, we need an overarching post-Europe 2020 strategy for the European Union. Of course, as Social Platform, we welcome the action plan, but I think it is a missed opportunity that it defines only 3 headline targets in the fields of employment, education and skills, and poverty reduction. For us, targets are crucial to measure progress made, and we believe it is a missed opportunity to not have measurable targets on all 20 principles of the pillar. We also believe that some of the targets set must be more ambitious, and most notably the target on poverty reduction. Reducing poverty has been of crucial importance even before the pandemic, and is now even more so in the context of the COVID-19 recovery. The action plan foresees to lift 15 million people out of poverty by 2030, which is significantly lower than the targets of the SDGs, which aim to lift around 30 million people out of poverty in the same time frame. So we need to be ambitious. The action plan and the Porto Social Summit are just one step in achieving a more social Europe. It is crucial now that member states endorse these targets and commit to set their own ambitious national targets, ensuring that the EU jointly at least achieves, but hopefully exceeds the EU targets contained in the action plan. Moreover, commitment and concrete action on all principles of the pillar is needed to improve working and living conditions and guarantee a decent standard of living across all of the European Union. So we truly believe that common challenges require common solutions, and that coordinated EU action is now more crucial than ever to prevent further social polarization and poverty in the EU. So I will also highlight a few key areas in which we believe EU and national action is needed. On poverty reduction through social protection and adequate income, those adequate social protection systems and adequate incomes are absolutely crucial to reduce the number of people living in poverty and social exclusion. With regards to social protection, we are calling for an EU framework directive on adequate minimum income. Now, this directive is not meant to harmonize national minimum income schemes, but rather to define levels of adequacy that minimum income schemes need to fulfill to guarantee everyone a decent standard of living. So while we welcome that the action plan foresees a council recommendation for 2022, we regret that not more ambitious action is taken, especially in the context of the COVID-19 pandemic, which has, of course, pushed more people into poverty. On quality employment, we also believe that more needs to be done for the 17.5 million people living at risk of poverty and social exclusion, and that despite being in employment. And so we urge the swift adoption of the proposed directive on adequate minimum wages in the EU. Work needs to pay and enable people to live fulfilling lives, and employment needs to be a viable protection against poverty. We welcome the target to put 78% of the population aged 20 to 64 into employment by 2030 and to cut the gender employment gap by half. Equally, we welcome that the number of young people neither in employment, education or training should be reduced. However, what we would have liked to see is employment sub-targets for youth and other groups in vulnerable situations, whose employment rates have been particularly hard hit during the pandemic. Moreover, I would really like to stress that employment rates should not be increased at all costs, and that all measures need to have the assurance of quality employment at its core to bring about positive and lasting change in the long term. We must also talk about available, accessible, and affordable quality services, including health, care, and social services. The pandemic has provoked increased public recognition of the importance of services, including social services, and particularly for people in vulnerable situations. At the same time, the pandemic brought to the surface that the needs of many people have not been met. And this is because of the persistent lack of investment in this sector over the previous years. So as a social platform, we have been advocating for considering social services as equal to essential services contained in this pillar. We believe that there is a need for an EU strategy for social services so that it can support member states to develop a resilient ecosystem for social services, contributing to building a quality, affordable, available, accessible, and resilient social infrastructure in all 27 member states. Decision makers need to remember that at some stage in our lives, every single one of us will need some degree of health, care, and social service support. So investment in high quality social services across the EU is vital. And finally, on stakeholder involvement, I would of course say that the involvement of civil society organizations with crucial expertise and knowledge of lived realities of people, including those in the most vulnerable situations, as key stakeholders, is critical to ensure the full and ambitious implementation of the pillar and its action plan. So whilst we regret the action plan does not mention the need to strengthen civil dialogue, what we will ask for at the Social Summit is the buy-in from stakeholders for joining up social and civil dialogues, acknowledging the areas where they have different roles and legal spaces, of course, but ensuring that the voice of civil society, which very often brings the life stories of people on the ground, is given equal place at negotiating tables. We strongly welcome that the European Commission encourages member states to set up a national coordination mechanism to ensure the engagement of all stakeholders in the implementation of the social pillar. We know that our member networks are ready to engage in these mechanisms at the national level, and so we call on all member states to absolutely fully involve civil society organizations in all steps of the policy making, implementation, evaluation, and monitoring process in relation to the social pillar. Thank you, Heather.
Thank you very much, Piotr, for giving us a really comprehensive overview of what civil society is looking for from not just from the Social Summit this coming weekend, but in general from the European institutions and member states when it comes to the development of this new social rule book, or indeed this new concept of social Europe. I was quite interested because you referred right at the beginning to this question of the balancing of priorities. And one of the struggles that there seems to be is understanding that social and economic are two sides of the same coin, effectively. Whereas often instead they're seen as a hierarchy, that if we have positive social economic policies, they'll have an impact then on social policies. And I think what I'm hearing from you is you're saying, no, let's change that thinking. Let's have it that they're balanced, that they're two sides of the same coin that move in tandem together and indeed are intersected. When it comes to civil society, and you're very strongly calling for civil society to have a place at the table. Yesterday, the social platform in the first part of this conference held a number of workshops that were organized by members of the social platform and other partners, and where voices of people with experience and voices of the networks who are working in different areas of social policy were working together. And I wondered if you could give us some feedback from those workshops and any key messages from those workshops that we as social platform want to be heard later this week in Porto.
Absolutely, Heather. And perhaps my first remark would be that it was from the conversations I have had with some of the members who were in charge of running the workshops, but also then engaging with our colleagues in the social platform secretariat. The messages of the workshop, which I will share with you in a second, were very powerful. And I think what was really important as well, that across the workshops, as you said, that the voices of the people with the lived in reality of the focus of the specific workshop, so whether it's quality employment or lack of access to quality employment, or being negated access to education, acquisition of lifelong learning skills, or the impact on your life chances right from the start of being a child, bringing those realities into the workshops really changes the dynamics of our conversations. Because very often I feel, especially over the course of the last year, sitting on Zoom and other platforms, we sort of operate in that, we've been operating often in this high-level bubble without really looking into the experiences from the ground. So I think it's also a very important reality check also for social platform as a network of networks to engage in that. But indeed, we had some very strong recommendations. So our first workshop focused on the roadmap to quality employment through a just transition and fair recovery. And there our colleagues say that the EU and member states need to ensure the reach of quantitative headline target 1 in the action plan in a way that creates and fosters quality employment. And of course, that means adopting bold strategies and measures as part of a just green transition and recovery. And that includes adequate wages, job security, health and safety, lifelong learning, collective bargaining, and work-life balance for everyone. And there also needs to be a holistic interpretation of just transition necessary to ensure social and labor market inclusion for those who are traditionally left behind and most negatively affected by the green transition. So EU and member states need to strengthen the integration of environmental and social policies. So we come back to bringing together the social with the other ambitions and considerably increase the Just Transition Fund to underpin them. And then we also had a specific workshop that looked at lifelong and life-wide learning for just green transitions. And there, our colleagues said that every EU policy needs to ensure that it contributes to just green transition and to the implementation of a sustainable digital infrastructure and digital skills. Because these are key to inclusion and cohesion. We need to avoid the digital poverty as well that you and I spoke about yesterday at another occasion. Lifelong and life-wide learning is a continuous process and a human right, which needs a holistic approach to curricula, to methodology and evaluation, and which hears the voices of all stakeholders, students, learners, parents, employers, civil society, and also democratic institutions. And the second message from that workshop was that every policy must make sure it contributes to a just green transition, and it must include a lifelong learning dimension. Lifelong learning cannot be reduced just to employability, and we're absolutely clear on that as well as social platform. To maintain and enhance democratic societies, we must include the development of active democratic citizenship. We need to talk about transversal competences, which are mainly acquired through non-formal and informal learning, through social action, through volunteering. So member states must guarantee that these competences are validated in cooperation with civil society and with employers' organizations, with chambers of commerce and other responsible actors. So then we had two more workshops in the afternoon. One of them was focusing on reducing inequalities from the very first years of life, a very important workshop on the role of early childhood development. Because a strong social Europe starts with upholding the rights of all children, and absolutely regardless of their social, administrative, or other status from their earliest years. So in implementing the Pillar of Social Rights Action Plan, member states and EU decision makers must set ambitious targets to reduce child poverty and tackle persistent health and social inequalities disproportionately affecting vulnerable groups by investing in early childhood development, because every child needs to have a fair start in life. And also member states and EU decision makers must really urgently address the levels of social exclusion, poverty, and discrimination faced by children from vulnerable groups from early childhood. And this requires an assessment of needs, including disaggregation of data on poverty and exclusion among children under the age of 6, and action to address systemic disparities in access to social rights. And then last but not least, we looked at social economy. The question mark there was the road to social Europe, an action plan for and with Europe's social economy. The action plan on social economy must have a real impact on the support and promotion of social economy, its actors, and their economic model. We said that it should make strong links with the existing EU policies enabling green, fair, circular transition, and especially in the post-COVID economic recovery. So while embracing social economy enterprises, activism, and all sectors of the economy, it should also prioritize the social and professional inclusion of disadvantaged people, especially young people and ethnic minorities, and that includes the Roma. And adequate funding, encouraging accessible education and training opportunities to achieve social justice and equality are fundamental here. For the adequate implementation of the action plan, the public authorities at all levels, national, regional, and local, must guarantee an active participation of all stakeholders. To provide an effective impetus for the social economy, the European Commission needs, in parallel of the action plan, to also consider social economy enterprises, their specificities, and their needs in all other policies and regulations that concern them. And that includes the industry strategy, taxation policies, the SME strategy, and so on. So these were very important messages coming from our 4 workshops. Now it's also our task as the team of 3 going to Porto to make sure we take them together with us and deliver them in front of the EU institutions and member states on Friday.
Thank you very much, Piotr, for that overview. And I'm sure that those outcomes will also be available eventually on the social platforms website. But something that struck me as you were speaking were 3 things. One is that the members of social platform have very much had both a universal and a targeted approach. So recognizing that there are universal principles, universal actions that are needed, and then targeted actions for specific situations, life stages, or indeed because of existing discrimination, barriers, systemic injustice that requires particularly targeted actions. And the other word that I picked up that struck me was about being actions taking place in parallel. So one of the things that struck me at the moment is that we seem to have many strategies at EU level and many roadmaps and transitions and things that are happening. And it's how to align all of those so that they're reinforcing each other. So for example, the Social Economy Action Plan and the European Pillar of Social Rights Action Plan, the national strategies for Roma integration, the proposals on the integration of third country nationals, the proposed health union. That the one thing as I listen to you, I feel is missing in all of these things indeed is an action plan on social services, but that's maybe another debate for later on. But the alignment and the working in parallel seems to be coming through very strongly from the members, but also the need to integrate at some point, to integrate all these strategies to know what we're working towards. And hopefully later this week, if we have a declaration from Porto, it will give that idea of where is it we're traveling towards? what is it that we want to have. So thank you very much, Piotr, for that very comprehensive overview. And we're now going to turn to our other panelists this morning. And first of all, we would like to introduce a video message from Commissioner Nicolas Schmit, Commissioner for Employment and Social Affairs. And that video will be shown here as his contribution to our debate this morning. Unfortunately, we don't seem to have any sound on the video, but like everything as we do it online, it takes a few moments and we will get that fixed.
Ladies and gentlemen, it is a pleasure to address you at this flagship conference. More than ever, we need a strong social Europe, and I'm looking forward to hearing your voice at the Porto Social Summit. Firstly, because European citizens expect action. Secondly, the pandemic has made us give even more value to the European social model. It has also highlighted the shortcomings and the new challenges. We must keep these lessons in mind as we move from crisis fighting to recovery policies. In March, the Commission adopted an action plan to implement the principles of the European Pillar of Social Rights. It aims at rallying all forces around the pillar's concrete vision, which stands at the center of our recovery policies. Social rights and social cohesion must drive the recovery. The green and digital transitions need to include social progress, so everyone can benefit from the opportunities they can bring. The Social Pillar Action Plan, the European Green Deal, and Europe's Digital Decade are intertwined and mutually reinforcing. With 1.8 trillion euros, the new long-term budget and the Next Generation EU recovery package shall boost social investment the greener and digital economy needs. Investments in people will ensure that the green and digital transitions are socially fair and just. To focus our joint efforts, the action plan puts forward 3 EU-level targets for 2030, consistent with the UN Sustainable Development Goals. First of all, we want to achieve an employment rate of at least 78% in 2030. This is not an abstract target. It means more and better job opportunities, particularly for women, for the young, and for vulnerable groups. The action plan also sets the target of at least 60% of adults participating in training every year by 2030. This target translates principle number 1 of the pillar. The right to be skilled and reskilled has to benefit all workers in a rapidly changing world of work. Last but not least, I want to emphasize the fight against rising inequality and poverty that divide our societies and finally lead to social exclusion. The number of people at risk of poverty or social exclusion of 2019 must be reduced by at least 15 million people by 2030, out of which at least 5 million children. Combating poverty is each member state's duty. It is an investment in more resilient and innovative societies. This requires an integrated approach that the EU will actively promote and support. The Commission is pursuing an ambitious social agenda. We have announced new proposals in the area of minimum income, long-term care, and essential services. Implementing the social pillar relies on all actors. That is why we invite the European Council to endorse the targets and call on member states to be ambitious when they define their way to achieve them. We encourage member states to set up coordination mechanisms on the implementation of the pillar at national level. Civil society actors, together with social partners, should play an important role. At the EU level, the European semester will remain the main tool to coordinate and monitor progress towards the implementation of the social pillar. To make it more efficient and relevant, we have to improve its ownership. We are making good progress on the update of the social scoreboard. This will allow us to further deepen and enlarge our analysis of the implementation of the social pillar in all its dimensions. The Porto Social Summit must put us firmly on track towards a fairer, more inclusive, and more resilient Europe in 2030. I count on your support and engagement and wish you a fruitful discussion.
So our virtual thanks to Commissioner Schmit for his words this morning, and indeed his ambition in bringing forward the proposed action plan on the European Pillar of Social Rights. And on that question of ambition from the European Commission, I'd like to turn to our first speaker on our panel this morning, and that's Mr. Joost Korte, who is Director-General at the Directorate-General for Employment, Social Affairs and Inclusion within the European Commission. And he is well known to many of us. He has a distinguished career within the European Commission and has been a very vocal supporter of civil society's engagement in social policies generally and in the action plan particularly. And Mr. Korte, Commissioner Schmit said there that he was counting on the support of civil society and other stakeholders in the implementation of the action plan on the Pillar of Social Rights. And I suppose the question I have for you is, are you counting on the support of member states in the adoption and endorsement of the targets and of the revised social scoreboard? And what then are your expectations for the Porto Social Summit from the side of the European Commission? And if member states do give that endorsement, what will then the European Commission be doing to support member states in setting up their national actions and national coordination? So if I can hear from you how you see that support going.
Yeah, thank you very much, Heather, and thank you for having me. It's always a bit uncomfortable to speak immediately after the Commissioner, but thank you nevertheless for giving me the floor and to speak before ministers and elected officials is not easy either. But I mean, for us, I think the expectations of Porto are very much in line with what Nicolas Schmit just said. I think the most important thing that should come out of Porto is, I think, a clear commitment at the highest political level of the European Union that the recovery will be green, digital, and fair. I think this is, for me at least, the key message that should come out in a way that is comprehensible, not only for us as sort of experts or people who live with these issues every day, but also for the people of Europe, because I think there is a lot of confusion and a lot of misunderstandings about the role that we can play, that Europe can play, the European Union can play. So that's, to me, the key thing. The second is, of course, the endorsement of the three headline targets. What I know, what I follow at the level of the preparatory work is that seems to be going in the right direction. I'm not sure we will get a formal endorsement. Anyway, we should not forget that the meeting is an informal one. It's an informal meeting of the heads of state and government, the members of the European Council. So I think, strictly speaking, it will not be possible for them to take any decisions. But they can give a very good sense of direction, and I'm quite confident that this will come for the 3 headline targets, and that is extremely important. Because we know that behind these headline targets, there are a lot of complicated follow-up questions that need to be answered. The biggest one, I think, is what does this mean for each and every individual member state? And we will deal with these issues. But I think there's not much point in getting bogged down in details before we have that clear endorsement at the highest level, set the targets for 2030. And that brings me to my third point, which is also, I think it's important that that Porto is the start of a process. It's not, I don't see this at the end of it. I mean, it would be fantastic to get the formal endorsement of the headline targets, and then what? So there needs to be a follow-up. There needs to be, I think, also a reignition, if I may say so, of the European semester with all its processes, and the action plan gives a lot of hints there. We had to basically suspend parts of the semester because of the COVID crisis and the focus on the recovery and resilience facility, which I think everybody understands. But this is a temporary thing. So the sooner as it's possible, we should return to normality in a way, and follow up on these targets and hold member states to account. And that, my last word, if I may still, Heather, is I think that's also where you come in. Because of course, I mean, I'm an official of the European Union, so I work for the member states mostly, but I also work for you, and I know how important it is that we have your support, and of all the people that stand behind you in Brussels, but more importantly still, I think, in your member states. I think that's where the advocacy, and that's where the support and where the constant call for action, I think, needs to be coming from in a very, very strong way. We can do lots of things here in our own sort of bubble, but of course the real things needs to be done in the cities and in the companies, by the social partners and by civil society. And this is particularly relevant, I think, in an area where we know all that very well, that the competences of the European Union are fairly limited. So we help, we do our best, but without you, we wouldn't actually, I think, advance very much. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I mean, it's always a pleasure to hear how important civil society is, and that the involvement should be there. And so maybe just picking up on that point, I mean, Commissioner Schmit also reinforced this message of having some sort of coordinating structure on the pillar of social rights at national level. I mean, what do you imagine that could be, and how could the European Commission support that actually taking place?
Yeah, well, I mean, we had many discussions inside the Commission, indeed also with Nicolas and with others, whether there would be a need to sort of reinforce the processes of the European semester, and whether we should perhaps also ask member states to designate a specific person or nominate a specific body for this. And in the end, I think the decision was clearly taken not to go that far. And to make sure that there is a follow-up at the national level of the semester, but not to appoint specific semester persons or bodies in the member states. And also the other thing is not to make it, I should say, over-bureaucratic. And you know very well that there is already criticism that the current semester is already too heavy. And that this is in fact deterring a commitment from the member states. They do not want to write more papers or involve more people. And I think this is reflected in the action plan. How this will then be taken forward, practically speaking, we need to discuss all this with the member states. We are doing this through the two already committees in the council, the EMCO and the SPC, and we will come back to conclude, I think, a bit later down the road.
Thanks very much. I mean, you also mentioned that this is a starting point. I think for many of us, we saw the adoption, the proclamation of the Pillar of Social Rights in Gothenburg as a starting point, and now we're in the next phase, so we can decide how we do it. And the Commission has been quite clear that the Pillar of Social Rights is a compass. And now that compass is defining action, whether it be within the European semester and through country-specific recommendations, or also at member state level. But we've also seen this week that there's been different understandings of what the targets that you're keen to see adopted could be. For some member states, they are regarding them as an inspiration for action on a national level, which is quite a vague term. And other member states are really pushing for the Commission to take on as much legislative, political or policy and financial actions as possible to support a social Europe. If I can push you slightly, where do you think you will end up on that scale of some skepticism and then some great enthusiasm? Where do you think that will end?
Well, we'll see in Porto how that ends. I must say that, again, looking at the preparatory discussions, which are very intensive, and they're actually led by the President of the European Council. As you know, I mean, the draft declaration is, I think, quite firm. I mean, if I may say, it's better than I had expected. So I'm quite happy from that. There's also going to be, of course, the outcome of the other conference that will take place the day before, the High International Conference, with a specific commitment. There will be references to that, if everything goes well, into the declaration of the heads of state and government. So I think things are not as bleak as some people say, but you're absolutely right that there is, and this is not new, there are different views about this in the European Union. Everybody always agrees that we need a stronger social Europe. I've said this many times before, but I've never met anybody who's against social Europe. I've never met anybody either who's against the internal market. But that doesn't mean that everything that the Commission proposes is welcomed. To make those two important concepts real and operational and give them teeth. That is clear, and that is in a way my daily work, confronting member states, notably the member states, with their own, in a way, contradictions. How is it possible to sign up to this and then later on in the working party or in Korte defend an approach that I would then characterize as being quite different? So this is, but we're advancing, Heather. I think we are really advancing. And honestly, if you just think of one thing, sometimes it's good to take a step backwards. The first, as Jean-Claude Juncker always reminded us, he was the one who organized the first ever social summit in the European Union. It wasn't even called European Union at the time. It was, I think, in 1997 in Luxembourg. Then the second one was in Gothenburg. This was in 2017. And now we have the third one. So we're not doing so badly. Who had ever expected after Gothenburg that the European Council itself in its strategic agenda would ask for an action plan to implement it? And now the action plan is there. And who would have thought that in Porto they will, I think, hopefully endorse that action plan as a roadmap for work. So I think honestly sometimes we are underestimating, the steps that are being made, but I think also the impact of COVID-19 should not be underestimated. This, I think, has changed the debate not only in the European Union but worldwide about the role of governments, the importance of social services, the importance of frontline workers, the importance of wages. I think the approaches that I see that governments take in many countries is so different from the one they took after the financial crisis or in the financial crisis. This gives me a lot of hope. So I see an open field for action, for legislation and other initiatives, and I'm sure Nicolas Schmit will do his best to in his mandate to exploit that to the maximum. I have no doubt.
Thank you very much, and I liked how you touched at the end there about the need to, in a sense, learn differently from what we had in the past. I mean, when we had the financial and economic crisis of 2008, there was a lot of emphasis put on structural reforms, which for many people align with austerity and restriction of investment. And if I understand you correctly, you're seeing a path ahead for greater investment, a greater understanding of what makes our societies cohesive, and not doing the same as before, but trying to find new ways to go forward. And we certainly hope that this weekend in Porto will be the opportunity to do that. So we look forward to that endorsement. And then I think a lot of work for stakeholders, whether it be the European institutions, member states, civil society, social partners, as to how we will see that change. And if I think about your point about the time between social summits, it's getting a lot less. So after what, 13 years between social summits, it's now down to 3.5. So maybe we'll start getting to a social summit every year or every 2 years in the future as well.
I think we should also, if I may, Heather, sorry to interrupt you maybe, but I think we should also really praise the role that the Portuguese presidency with the minister and of course the prime minister. I mean, it also is very often down to the initiatives of politicians, and Prime Minister Costa has really put a lot of his political capital into this event, and like Jean-Claude Juncker did, and Stefan Löfven, and I think this is also important. And you're right, it would be fantastic if we had regular summits devoted to this important issue.
So that's something for us to look forward to. And at this point, indeed, I want to turn to the Portuguese presidency and welcome Madame Ana Mendes Godinho, who is Minister of Labour, Solidarity and Social Security in the Portuguese government, and indeed has been at the forefront, along with Prime Minister Costa, in trying to get this commitment to a greater social Europe, and made it a real focal point of their presidency. So, Madam Minister, welcome to this flagship conference this morning. And I would like to start by asking you indeed the same question about what are your key objectives for the Porto Social Summit, and how do you see the engagement of member states? And in the remaining part of your presidency, how will you follow up on the social summit and support the implementation of the social pillar?
Well, good morning, Heather. Good morning from Portugal. In this last mile till Porto, we are running up to catch to Porto, and thank you for organizing this event in such a crucial time where we are all discussing and putting the pressure under what's going on and what will happen in Porto. We all know how tough and how intense the challenges we are living and we are facing as countries and as Europe, and even at our personal lives, how they have changed in the last year so much, and how poverty and unemployment in Europe just grew in consequence of COVID in the last months, and it changed completely what we foresaw for our near future. And great expectations, I feel, and we all feel, that society asks and waits for European stakeholders, all stakeholders. First of all, and I think this will be the big achievement that we will have in Porto, will be the gathering of everyone at the same stage: civil society, social partners, European institutions, member states, all at the same stage, discussing and putting in the center of our discussion the European Pillar of Social Rights Action Plan, with concrete measures, with concrete goals, measurable goals, and trying to keep up this movement, this momentum that Europe has indeed been able to show that during these months it has worked together in a collective way to answer in a way to tackle with quick reaction at health issues, health levels, but also in terms of measures to support economies, enterprises, protect jobs, to support with financial instruments, and to keep this momentum and guaranteeing that this social mood this social dimension is the basis of the recovery. So I think this is the main target and the main goal that we expect to have, this global commitment, this global compromise at all stakeholders, European levels, that the European pillar of social rights must be at the center of the European recovery. This is the first message that I think is crucial, showing that this is also a different way to answer a crisis. It's not an answer of austerity, it's an answer of investment and in trust, in giving trust and confidence to people with feasible hope, which I think people need at the moment. People need to believe in a feasible, reliable hope with concrete instruments. And Europe, I think, has shown that it is possible to have this common reaction, common answer, not only in emergency, but now in terms of structural investment. Of course, you know how we strongly believe as a country, Portugal strongly believes and welcomes the action plan with the concrete goals, concrete measures. We all know that there are some discussions of the different binding connections that and commitments that the several countries identify. But we think that the Porto summit will be the stage for our common ambition. And this will be a common ambition, despite the different methods that each country interprets. And we also think this is also a unique opportunity to give an impetus to the implementation of the action plan, to help in the European recovery and to be the basis of the double transition, digital and climate. So the social dimension as a spinal cord of this double transition and of the recovery. And at the same time, it will give a unique opportunity for everyone, for social society, again, European institutions, social partners, and member states to reinvigorate our European social model, making the principles of the pillar turn into reality, into concrete measures, assuming this as going from principles to concrete actions. 4 years since Gothenburg, and you were just discussing how we are diminishing or making these social summits less and less in less time, which shows the interest and the commitment and the need to have these discussions more regularly. But this is also, I think, a sign and a clear message that we are shaping together this backbone that unites us all. This is why, of course, we put so much emphasis in the Porto Summit, but I would say it's not only us. Of course, you know, the commitment our Prime Minister Costa has had during all the presidency, because he believes in this social Europe as the backbone that unites us all, but not only Portugal, because what we feel is that there has been a huge interest from all the stakeholders, and this is shown by the presidencies that we will have, and we believe this is the time to deliver, and as I heard before, this is the time to bring the different sides of the coin into the same stage. Of course, building on the European Commission's action plan and on the European Parliament report on a social Europe for just transitions, we decided, and that's what we are seeking, to have a broad commitment that fosters the best political conditions for making a reality the principles of Gothenburg. This is the main goal: principles to action to concrete measures. At the same time, we hope that this commitment can guide our joint efforts to guarantee closer reach to answer our citizens' lives needs for, of course, jobs-rich recovery, and calling, of course, calling the member states to endorse the European Pillar of Social Rights Action Plan and the 2030 headlines targets proposed by the European Commission. we believe and we want to send a clear message that the urgency is clear to everyone and that we all come together. We feel this is, as Joost just said, also an ignition moment. We need this ignition moment. And of course, we will do our follow-up in the next months, and followed, of course, by our partners of the trio. Janez Cigler is participating, and he will also share his view. But we will also have at our EBSCO meeting in June, we will have the follow-up, and we even included an area dedicated to the future of the European semester and the connection and the necessary link to the the European Pillar of Social Rights Action Plan. So following up, and of course then taking the lead to the several files that we have on the table about these concrete measures that are already deliverable from the action plan.
Thank you very much. It's a delight to hear a politician who's so enthusiastic about their subject and who has shown over this presidency such a commitment. And I was interested in what you said about feasible hope. And I wondered if you could, what does that look like to you as we come out of or we hope that we start to come out of the COVID crisis? But at the same time, I mean, even before the COVID crisis, there was still too much poverty, too much unemployment, too much discrimination and barriers in Europe. So what would feasible hope look like in 1 year's time? What would that feasible hope have transferred to from your perspective?
Well, I believe this feasible hope translates into concrete results that people believe. I can give you the concrete example of what the mechanism SURE did, for example, to protect jobs. So people now have faced with concrete results what the get-together of a common and collective instrument, financial instrument at European level, delivered in terms of supporting and protecting jobs at European level. We can see, for example, how the numbers of unemployment rates did not went under control because these concrete public instruments were deliverable through concrete measures that were put in place fast that sustained employment and jobs. So this is what I think it's feasible hope. People need to have concrete actions that do make them believe. And I think these mechanisms, these extraordinary mechanisms that were taken up all through Europe, for example, to protect jobs, are these concrete types of solutions that make people believe in social models. When everything failed, when economy stopped, because it had to stop for sanitary reasons, it was the social model that answered, that protected, supported families when they had to stay at home because schools were closed, that guaranteed a public system of health, that gathered vaccines for people, that protected the more fragile. So this social model that did react in a very quick way during these last months is what I believe what makes people believe in concrete actions. And these concrete actions are the concrete measures, for example, that the social plan, the European social pillar of social rights have in terms of concrete measures, namely the files that we have on the table, the child guarantee. So concrete actions to change what we have to admit as society that has to be changed. And I think this is the biggest message that we all have to learn from this pandemic. We do have to change things. There are things that have to be changed. the number of people who were, for example, in precarious work, or the number of people that were outside of the social protection systems because they were informal, they were outside of the formal economy, they had undeclared work, they had atypical forms of work that were not covered by traditional systems of social protection systems. This is what we have to change with the transparency, with being open, of course, to address these problems with concrete answers. With the ones who need to have a European level answer, they have to have a European level answer, and the ones at national mechanisms, of course, but always with this broad motivation of guaranteeing that we also have European instruments, namely regulatory and national and financial instruments, to focus and to address the concrete needs. And the concrete needs are based in social, real needs of real people.
So the social, real needs of people is your ambition, really, for the social summit, that the conclusions that come out of that are based on the social, real needs of people. And I think that in the Social Platforms Conference over the last 2 days, the emphasis has come from a number of the workshops that we've had on having both a universal approach and also a targeted approach. And I think that what we saw in the immediate social reactions to the COVID crisis was that universal approach, and that has been through the SURE instrument. But now, as we move forward, we've also got to bring in the targeted approaches for people in particularly precarious situations, not only in employment, but also because of systemic barriers. And so we hope that the content, the conclusions that came from the Social Platforms event yesterday will be fed into the discussions in Porto at this weekend. But we will stop there for now, because we're going to now turn to your partner in the trio, or one of the trio, other members of the trio, and then we're getting a number of questions coming in through the chat that we will then come back to with our panelists. So thank you very much, Minister Godinho. We will only pause, we will come back to you. But indeed now I'd like to turn to Minister Janez Cigler, who is a minister in the Slovenian government, who indeed will have the I would like to say, somewhat difficult job of following up the Portuguese presidency and taking forward the decisions, the endorsements that will come from this weekend. And as Minister of Labour, Family, Social Affairs and Equal Opportunities in Slovenia, what are your expectations from Porto, and what do you see as your task in your presidency?
Dear Heather, nice to meet you after, I don't know, 20 years maybe, and nice to hear from you. Dear colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, firstly, allow me to thank the Social Platform for organizing the conference and inviting me to this panel. I really find these discussions with civil society in particular valuable, since I'm well aware of the fact that not all vulnerable situations on the ground can be reflected in statistics. So I'm also very grateful for all the efforts made by the Social Platform for principles of the European Pillar of Social Rights to become a reality. As you know, Slovenia has been and is supporting the European Pillar of Social Rights from the start, and calling for genuine upward convergence in the EU. We really strongly believe that in the future, the effective implementation of the European Pillar of Social Rights in the context of population aging, digitalization and green transition should be at heart of all discussions, as it contributes to the improvement of working and living conditions in the EU during the recovery, and will do so in future. Therefore, we all need to invest in it, and I totally agree with other colleagues, panelists, what they emphasized in their speeches.
Thank you, Minister. I mean, what do you see as being the main topics that you think will have to be followed up under your presidency? What do you see as the priorities? As Minister Godinho was saying, we have to move from implementation to concrete action that has very specific change. So what do you see as the priorities that will come under your presidency in order to see that change?
Well, in fact, we will all focus or take into the account a global challenges which were mentioned, green, digital, and other transitions in a fair way. But we will especially focus on two areas during the presidency. The first one will be quality work for life quality of all generations, where we want to point out three aspects which we believe are important for sustainable and quality work. These are measures for health and safety at work, acquiring skills throughout the life course, and as well as measures for better work-life balance. This is especially important for families, and we experienced that during the COVID pandemic. The second priority is the life cycle approach to aging for inclusive recovery and successful tackling of the demographic challenges. We want to raise awareness among the relevant stakeholders that the life course approach to aging could lead to a win-win situation, creating more sustainable societies. Within this topic, if I may say, we want to promote discussions on the importance of ensuring equal opportunities for all children, empowering persons with disabilities, and overcoming stereotypes on aging. By promoting a life cycle approach to aging, all topics will be addressed in the context of gender equality. In this regard, we'll also address combating cyber violence against women and girls. So that would be our main focuses, main priorities for the presidency.
Thank you very much, Minister. And those are very, very key topics and areas that many members of Social Platform are actively engaged in, from ensuring a reduction in gender disparities, but also ensuring that abuse, whether it be online or in person, of specific groups in our societies is eradicated as much as possible. So with that being in the context of the Pillar of Social Rights, how will Slovenia lead the way, if you like, to show and develop the consultation mechanism that the Commission is proposing when it comes to the implementation of the pillar, this consultation mechanism with civil society? And you yourself have been active in both civil society and in social partners in your career, so you're well placed to know how to do that. So will Slovenia lead the way in showing how engagement and consultation and co-development can be done with civil society?
That's very important thing you pointed out, you stressed out, and very important mission. As I always mention, it's really important for all stakeholders to contribute to the implementation of the pillar in line with their competences and take their responsibility in the process. with the social summit, the process of consultation will be given, I strongly believe that, a new increased impetus. I'm a supporter of open dialogue, which will be key, not only in times of recovery, but also in the future transitions. I have used every opportunity in these difficult times to consult and listen to our social partners and civil society on the crisis and recovery measures. But of course, there's also a place for improvements, always. We also established good contacts with a social platform and our other partners on the European level. So, and we intend to do so also during our presidency. We will certainly look into good practices of other member states, establishing new coordination mechanisms. However, I have also always called on using and improving the existing mechanisms and bodies. We'll build on that. We'll build on Mendes Godinho, my colleague, my predecessor work, and we'll try to further improve our cooperation for efficient development, implementation, monitoring, and evaluation of our policies and programs, contributing to the pillar, of course, and its principles.
Thank you, and we'll look forward to that continued cooperation with the Slovenian presidency. If I may pick up just on one last question, and it started to come through in the chat slightly as well, is that there is much ambition in the pillar, and we very much hope that the targets and everything will be endorsed. And then that leads, as both you and Minister Godinho have said, to implementation. And I suppose there's a question about how that's financed. And how do you see the use of EU funds? Is there enough EU funds to support member states to make the changes that they want to make? And how do you see the continued, if you like, allocation or use of EU funds to really address those targets?
Well, this is also a very important question. Well, it is seen, we experienced that the EU and many member states, I'm proud that Slovenia is among them, reacted fast, quickly, and massive, if I can say so, to the pandemic situation. So, as someone mentioned before, I think it was my colleague Anna. Let's say, for example, SURE instrument. Slovenia used funds from SURE instrument how would I say, very good to preserve workers and self-employed, self-employees, to preserve them, to help them, to support them, to overcome the time of the pandemic. So I think, and Slovenia thinks that we have enough instruments, funds that can help us with the recovery and with the normal life after the pandemic. It's our responsibility to make as much as possible out of them, and we really see the support on the one hand in this financial point of view, and on the other hand, which is maybe at least of the same importance, on the level of I don't know, sharing values, you know, and supporting each other with making steps forward, steps upwards, with empowering this principle of the pillar. So I think both is important, and both financial and values side of this question have to go hand in hand with each other.
Thank you very much, Minister. Well, we'll stop there and hear from our final speaker, but I'm already seeing more questions on this in the chat, and I'm sure there'll be some questions raised again, but thank you very much. And at this moment, I will say we also wish you good luck with your presidency, and as Social Platform look forward to continue to work with you. I would like to turn now to our final speaker on our panel, last but by no means least, and that is Mr. Luca Visentini, who is General Secretary of the European Trade Unions Congress, Confederation, my apologies. And as one of the social partners and a close partner of Social Platform, we have many ways of saying this, we're delighted that you're able to join us this morning, almost this afternoon. And having heard from the Commission, from ministers, but also from Social Platform, we'd be really interested to hear, how do you as the trade unions see Porto and see this development of this ambition of a more active, a more action-orientated social Europe, not just principles on paper, but actions in, we hope, member states, guided by EU proposals, funded through EU funds, but obviously often under the competency of member states. I mean, we've heard a lot about employment and about the need for quality and decent employment. That's obviously something that's very close to the heart of the trade unions. So what are your expectations for Porto? Will we see real systemic change in our understanding of social Europe? Will we really see this idea of social Europe being the spinal cord that holds everything else together? I really like that image that came from the Portuguese minister. How do you see things going in the next weeks?
Thank you very much, Heather, and the Social Platform, of course, a valuable partner for us in all this discussion. And good morning from Porto. I'm already there. And so in Porto is still morning. We are 1 hour ahead. Well, you know, I was already in Gothenburg. I was one of those that attended the other social summit, the one that we had 3.5 years ago. And it was very difficult times, I would say, because we were just getting out from the financial and economic crisis. We had some kind of recovery, but it was not the recovery we were hoping for. It was a jobless recovery, as we call it in jargon, a recovery without addressing the huge inequalities that happened because of the financial and economic crisis, because of the totally wrong austerity measures that were implemented by the Troika, by the European Commission, by the European Union, by the different member states in the horrible decade that we lived because of the financial crisis. So we really welcome at that time the great initiative of President Juncker and his Commission to put back, let's say, the social dimension of Europe at the core of the discussion. It was a great game changer, I will say, the Gothenburg Summit and the European Pillar of Social Rights to try to rebuild the European social model. So that was a very important moment. Thank you to the Commission, but thank you also and particularly to the Swedish government and Stefan Löfven at that moment that decided to organize this important summit in Gothenburg. And we had the social pillar. 20 fantastic principles. We negotiated until the very last minute, although the social partners and the social platform didn't proclaim the pillar because it was a purely institutional process at that moment, while now we have a full involvement, I would say, of all of us in the summit that will take place in 2 days. But 20 principles on paper. And that was the first criticism that came from all of us. And also Joost Korte was recalling this, that it's fantastic to have a pillar, but even if the European Commission makes their best to put in place legislative initiatives, and important ones follow the proclamation of the pillar. Just to mention one, the revision of the Posting of Workers Directive. That was a huge battle that we won in the end. And there were also many, many others. Joost for sure remembers exactly exactly how many, some 20, 25, I don't know how exactly, legislative initiatives in the social fields during and after the proclamation of the pillar, after more than 15 years of no legislation at all at the European level in the social sphere. So a lot of legislation followed the proclamation of the pillar, but I have to say very little, if not even no implementation of the pillar in practice at the national level. That was the major gap of the last 3.5 years. And so we didn't achieve upward social convergence after the proclamation of the pillar. This is the major problem we are facing now. And the fact that we didn't achieve upward social convergence, that we didn't have, let's say, fundamental investment in public services, in healthcare, in social protection systems, in social and workers' rights, well, made our resilience to the pandemic very little, unfortunately. And we have seen how difficult it was for Europe to cope with the pandemic, exactly because the 20 principles of the pillar were implemented for sure in some European legislation, but very little at the national level. That's why now having an action plan is crucial. Even if it's not ambitious enough, I fully agree with Piotr that at the beginning underlined a series of gaps that exist in the action plan that the European Commission has published a couple of months ago, but still it's an action plan. And an action plan was exactly our first demand from the very first moment when the pillar was proclaimed, that there was a necessity for having an action plan to make sure that the 20 principles can be translated into practice on the ground. And now the new Commission, von der Leyen Commission, Commissioner Schmit, DG Employment, they have done it. They have put on paper an action plan with 3 targets that are, again, maybe not the best we would like to see, but we have also to be realistic. Sometimes compromises are necessary, but at least we have 3 targets. 3 targets that are the right targets because they address employment, skills, that means also just transition, and they address poverty. That means also wages, working conditions, social protection, social services. I mean, to get out from poverty, to increase employment, to have skills for people, this means that you have also to put in place new social policies and new economic policies. It's not only social has to go together with economic, let's say, I would say a radical reform in the economic governance of the European Union. So there are these 3 targets, there are some sub-targets, and the challenge for the action plan is that we don't have to end up in the same situation we had for the EU 2020 strategy. That at the end of the 10 years period, end of 2020, none of the targets of that strategy has been achieved. We need to do exactly the opposite this time. We have 10 years in front of us until 2030. We have to make sure that the action plan is really the right tool to achieve these targets. And in this respect, we have 2 things to do. The first one is that we need to support the legislative initiatives that the European Commission has already launched, minimum wages, particularly pay transparency for gender pay equality, and the others that are going to come, platform work, due diligence, and many others. So it's very important that all the stakeholders, but particularly the institutions that are taking place in the Porto Summit and then in the informal council the day after, that everybody takes the commitment to support these legislative initiatives. And you know, it's not for granted. We are already seeing 11 countries sending letters around, I mean, with skepticism, with this insistence, obsessive insistence on subsidiarity, on the need to protect the national practices, etc. Well, of course, there is subsidiarity, it's written in the treaties, but this is not about subsidiarity. It's about being ambitious and going for upward convergence. Nobody is going to interfere in the prerogatives of each and every member state, but when there are practices at the national level that don't work, there must be some kind of coordination, there must be some kind of convergence, there must be some kind of harmonization, while fully respecting the national practices, the national prerogatives. But come on, colleagues, we need to be serious. So we expect, this is the major point, on the 7th and also on the 8th, we expect that all the governments, all the prime ministers and head of state, we will repeat this on the 7th, we expect that they all take a commitment for implementation of the pillar. And we have to say that from the leaked drafts of the Council conclusions for the 8th, for the joint declaration of the 7th, that is not a leaked draft, we are negotiating it. I mean, we are quite hopeful, I would say quite confident that in the end this commitment will be there. Because commitment means many things. Commitment means that each and every member state, the European Union, the social partner, the social platform, we all put in place actions. This means that we know exactly how to reach the targets, that we have tools in our hands to reach these targets, that we committed to reach the targets and to be consistent with these targets, and we don't go for policies and action that contradict the targets and on the contrary create a social divergence instead of converging for the better for each and every European citizens. As I said, it means supporting the European legislative initiatives, but means also reforming the European economic governance, reforming the fiscal rules, reforming the Stability and Growth Pact to eliminate austerity, to eliminate those structural reforms that in the past have gone in the wrong direction. And you know, is not yet done, because we have seen that during the discussion between the European Commission and the member states about the national recovery and resilience plans, some parts of the Commission are still insisting with some governments to introduce again structural reforms, to undermine collective bargaining, to make cuts in social services, to introduce again pension reforms, to destructurate and for precarization of the labor market. This is unacceptable. We cannot accept any longer to have the same narrative that we had in the past. So it's very important that also in the recovery strategy, in the European economic governance, the social dimension is back on track, that the pillar is embedded in the economic governance of the European Union, and that the pillar is also the instrument to achieve just transition. And to finish on this, it's very important for us, just transition is not only skills, is of course skills, but we are not there just to have fantastically super skilled unemployed people. This cannot be the way we manage just transition. Just transition means that when jobs are going to be destroyed because of climate change, because of digitalization, we have first of all to mobilize massive investment to create jobs in those communities that are going to be affected. And if we create quality jobs in those communities, not precarious ones, then of course, upskilling processes are fundamental to accompany this kind of transition. And all this needs, and this is my last point, social dialogue and civil dialogue. This needs full involvement of all the stakeholders, the social partners, the civil society organizations on the ground. And here, again, is the responsibility of member states to make sure that social dialogue really works in practice. We see too many situations in too many countries where social partners and civil society organizations are just formally involved, but they don't have really a voice. They don't have really an influence. In this respect, I think that our alliance for the social pillar, the alliance between the social platform, the ETUC, other social partners, other civil society organizations to boost the implementation of the pillar is a fundamental instrument in this respect. And so we can really work together for the best. Thank you. You are muted.
I am muted, my goodness. A year on and I'm still having these problems with muting. Thank you very much, Luca, and thank you for mentioning the Stand Up for the Social Pillar Alliance. That, as you mentioned, brings together a number of the different social, civil stakeholders for this. And one of the things that struck me as you were speaking is that we've heard a lot from Commissioner Schmit about updating the social rule book, which is a phrase that is important, and we understand that. But from what I'm hearing from you, you have a rule book and then you have a toolbox. So we need to update the rule book, but we also then need to have a toolbox that member states can use that is not something that is based on subsidiarity, as you said. I mean, I think we share that view very strongly as social platform, but is really providing ways in which changes that will improve the situation that will happen. And part of that toolbox is economic governance. And that's something that's also come up from the workshops that took place yesterday, and the other input that social platform has had is, again, this combination of economic governance and social progress have to go hand in hand. There can no longer be a hierarchy and a negative hierarchy on economic policies, then later coming to social policies. So I think together with the ETUC, Social Platform is very much aligned that we don't want to see the mistakes of the past. We don't want to see a return to austerity by the back door. And instead, we want to see this new approach. I'm really aware of time. It's 12:10. We have 20 minutes left. And so I'd like us to come back to all our panelists now. And we have a number of questions that have been posed in the chat. But at the same time, those of you who are watching via Zoom can also raise your hand and pose the question yourself. So I'm just going to give a moment to see what questions may be coming up. The panelists, I think, can see the chat anyway, and see if anybody wishes to raise their hands. And I will also be reliant on my colleagues in the Social Platform Secretariat to tell me if people are raising their hands as well, as I'm juggling quite a few screens now to see everybody. But perhaps I can take one question that came from Lucy Sasova from the ETUC. So Luca, you maybe don't need to answer this question, and I'll rather pass this one to our other panelists, which is, and particularly to the Slovenian minister, but it's great that there will be a focus on quality jobs for all ages. But in that case, how will you, under the Slovenian presidency, tackle precarious jobs and undeclared work? That is a problem that is very relevant to young people, but not only young people. So how do you see the continuing work in tackling precarious jobs and undeclared work under your presidency? So Minister Janez, perhaps I can start by asking you that question, please.
Of course, thank you, Heather, and thank you, Mrs. Susova, for this question. Precarious work and undeclared work are two phenomena we are all dealing with on a regular basis, also in Slovenia, and I believe other member states. The Slovenian presidency will, of course, address quality work for all generations. Quality work is not restricted to standard employment. It also includes non-standard forms which too often face precariousness. We expect that the policy discussions during our presidency will tackle these issues as well, and that we will come with some key messages. We, the ministers, need to exchange ideas and solutions, but even more important, we have some legislative proposals on the table, and more are to come that will as well deal with this question. So we'll do all in our power to find the balanced solutions that will render results for the well-being of all persons, including in the labor market.
Thank you very much, Minister. I think that what we've also seen from the COVID crisis is indeed those who have been in the most precarious of jobs have had one of the most negative experiences, and addressing precarious work, addressing those who employ people in a precarious way is really an utmost priority. So we look forward to the key messages, and we hope actions that will come from the Slovenian presidency. And that links to another question that's come up in the chat from Fintan Farrell, which where he is welcoming the focus on quality employment, but also recognizing the need to focus on accessible and inclusive labour markets. So reducing some of the barriers that often are to employment. And I wonder if I can perhaps pose that question, first of all, to Mr. Korte, how you see the role of reducing barriers to the labour market going hand in hand with the creation of quality jobs, and what is the role perhaps of the social economy in doing that? I'll pass that one to you first, Mr. Korte, and then perhaps to Minister Godinho as well.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Heather, for this question. Yes, indeed. I think we one of the actions that is put forward in the action plan is on social economy. I think the social economy has the huge benefit of making it easier for people who are in difficulties to enter the labor market and become actually successful entrepreneurs. There we will come with our plan later this year. But there are obviously many other activities that we are deploying. I mean, also when we are discussing, and Luca mentioned the platform work, there are many issues in the platform work which we will address. There are abuses, precarious jobs, but it is also for many people the first access to a job at all. Whether we like it or not, this sector does attract a lot of people who have otherwise difficulties in entering the labor market. So that's another balance that needs to be found, which I think we need to be all very much aware. And otherwise, we work very intensively with the public employment services in the member states. And overall, I think this idea of diversity and having a diversity workforce. At the end of the day, it's also, we shouldn't waste all the talent that is there, even if certainly with people with another color, that goes without saying, but also others, also people with disabilities, people who have been in trouble. I mean, it's just, the talent is very often there, but it requires an extra effort for them to also be fully part of the job market and hence contribute to our prosperity. I think, I mean, the Minister Cigler mentioned demography. If you look at the figures, it's clear that we cannot really lose basically anyone along the road, also in our own collective interest in the European Union. So I think this is clearly identified as one of the major challenges for the future.
Thank you very much, Mr. Korte. Minister Godinho, I mean, how do you see this approach to creating decent jobs, but removing the barriers that often prevent people from accessing the labour market in the first place?
Well, maybe I could share with you what we have foresaw in our IRF program, our Resilience and Recovery Plan. We included an area dedicated to training and employment. And in this area, we identified a program that we are going to launch, which is called Sustainable Employment Compromise. And it's a program to support and to finance the creation of new jobs, having as a compromise in change some rules. For example, in terms of security in the workplace, in terms of wage, to guarantee that the level of wage that it recognizes the worker and its quality job in terms of value, in terms of working time, in terms of working conditions. At the same time, we are putting in place two, I think, interesting programs that I would like to share with you. One of them is a program dedicated to be an agency for employment for people with disabilities. It's a special program that we created to make a match between the market and people with disabilities. So to help people with disadvantages of traditional entering in the market, to help them to enter in the market. So here to try to cut the barriers, the frontier between the workers with disabilities and the market. It's a platform, it's called Value T. We just launched it last week, trying to bring together different worlds that sometimes are separated. Enterprises, associations, social economy, and people with disabilities. So bringing worlds together. Another program that we are launching, which is an example of this cutting barrier, is a program that we created to reconvert some workers, unemployed workers, some workers who are some type of workers with some fragilities, who were outside of the market for a long time, for example. And we created a special program to reconvert into to work in the social economy. We have around 18,000 people that were included in this program in the last months. And it has been fantastic because people enter these in a training method, but then we give an incentive if the social organizations include them as permanent workers. And it has been amazing. Amazing how some people who were outside of the market for several years are now coming back into the market through this method. And it's been very, very interesting to see, first, the change in their lives. Second, how these organizations are looking at these workers as an opportunity, again, to have workers that could not be found in the market because there were no people available. So it's very interesting to see so trying to matchmake the different worlds and at the same time invest a lot in these quality jobs as this motto of sustainable employment compromise. Tripartite compromise. Enterprises, public employment services, and employees.
Thank you very much. So there's a really good example of something that could be in this toolbox that we started to talk about. I mean, the things that are actually working. But Luca, you've raised your hand. You want to come in on this, I think, and that might be our last comment for this morning, as we are rapidly running out of time.
Yeah, I cannot avoid, to comment about this.
Not at all.
It's my daily job.
I expect it.
My daily job to try, to fight for stable employment and protected employment. In the previous era, in the austerity era, the mantra was that flexibility only ensures full employment, and whatever job is better than no job. I think that introducing the social pillar 3.5 years ago has contributed a lot to change this narrative, but there are still all the laws and the structural reforms that have been introduced in the last decade that have to be removed if we want to change not only the narrative, but also facts in practice. Because whatever action is put in place, if we don't reform our labor market laws, it will be impossible for precarious workers and for non-standard self-employed workers to enjoy the same rights and protection as the other workers. And in this respect, it's fundamental to ensure that everybody can get a decent wage or a decent income. In this respect, the directive that the European Commission has proposed for a decent minimum wage for all and for reinforcing collective bargaining is fundamental. But even this is not enough, because at the moment, competition laws in each and every country of the European Union prevent non-standard workers and self-employed workers, for instance, from enjoying real collective bargaining. They cannot negotiate their income, they cannot negotiate their wage, and so there is no possibility for them to enjoy a decent wage, even if there is a directive that reinforces collective bargaining and minimum wage, if they don't have access to that. And the other major problem for this kind of workers is that they don't have access to social protection. They don't have access to decent pensions. They don't have access to normal social services. There was a scandal during the pandemic, and the fact that all the measures that were linked to SURE guaranteeing to all stable workers some kind of income compensation and income protection, well, in most of the member states, these measures didn't apply to self-employed, didn't apply to precarious workers. They didn't receive anything. Despite that in the regulation of SURE was said very clearly, also self-employed and non-standard workers must be included. But many member states didn't include them at all. Even Germany. In Germany, self-employed workers didn't receive anything from the Kurzarbeit system. So we need really to change the rules. In this respect, what Commissioner says, to change the rule book is fundamental. And then if you change the rule book, then you can create the tools. But if the rules remain the same, well, it's very difficult then to achieve concrete results.
Thank you very much, Luca. And I think it's also a timely reminder that when we're not just talking about employment in this discussion around the social Europe and the social rulebook, we're also talking, and it's been raised in the chat by a number of people, also about barriers, discrimination, whether it be to workers in precarious work, or whether it be people in precarious situations generally in society, that we're not just looking at employment, we're looking at everything when it comes to social protection. Who has access to social protection? Who has access to social services? Who has the rights, their social rights enshrined in the European Social Charter, actually realised regardless of the type of employment that they may be in, or indeed the life course situation that they may be in, or indeed the background by which they come from. So reinforcing that message about the rules of accessibility of social protection, of social services, being a fundamental part of this social rulebook, and then met by the actions that ensure there are no barriers to the labour market, no barriers to accessing services, no barriers to be able to participate in our societies. And I think as we conclude this panel, because unfortunately we are running out of time, as we are with every discussion like this, and before I pass to Piotr to conclude, I think that we have seen great support this morning for the adoption of the targets and the sub-targets of the Social Pillar Action Plan. And we hope that this weekend, Member States, led by our colleagues in Portugal and in Slovenia, will indeed ensure that those targets are endorsed, and that we will secure the European Union's social recovery from the pandemic, and indeed not build back as we were before, but build back better. And I think that that is the EU we want, where social rights are a reality for everybody living on our continent. And I think that the final perhaps message from me, listening to everybody this morning, is a real commitment to strengthening civil dialogue, consulting with civil society organisations, looking at what's happening, hearing the stories, and then working in partnership between civil society, social partners, institutional partners, to actually build that better social rulebook, but also toolbox. So thank you to all our panelists for today. I am going to pass over to Piotr, who as President of Social Platform will now bring this discussion to a conclusion this morning.
Well, thank you so much, Heather. Thank you, Mr. Korte, dear Anna, Janez, and Luca, and thank you to all the participants. Before I conclude, I would also like to say thank you to my colleagues in the Social Platform Secretariat. You all have worked so hard to ensure that our flagship conference takes place, and despite the different challenges that we have been seeing at our doorstep, and despite it being delivered online, this conference has been really engaging, dynamic, and so full of exchanges, discussions, and learning. So thank you very much. So we will go to the Social Summit in Porto to ensure that there is political commitment from the EU and member states to act together, working with social partners and civil society at equal footing to respond to the most complex crisis in decades, committing to the European Pillar of Social Rights and its action plan as the compass towards a more social Europe. What we really need in Porto, but also afterwards, is a much bigger commitment from all member states, the institutions, and all stakeholders to create a fairer and more equal union, agreeing to the targets set in the action plan for the pillar, as well as going beyond and showing our true commitment to achieving the Agenda 2030. We believe that the upcoming Social Summit in Porto is the opportunity to proclaim this political commitment towards building a real social Europe with sustainable well-being, solidarity, and social justice at its core. Whilst, as Anna actually said yesterday in another event, the summit will not solve everything, it will nevertheless be a moment where we can stress the overarching importance of aiming high and aiming for the social dimension of Europe after we all go home. We have high hopes and expectations that this landmark event sets the scene for EU's social agenda becoming prioritized at the highest level of EU decision-making. Portugal, the Social Summit in Porto, is seen by us and many others as a key event in Europe's social justice calendar. And this is also why we are calling for annual social summits to take place going forward. where we can take stock of the progress made towards achieving a truly social Europe, but we can also be bold and point out any shortcomings and any cutting of corners. In Porto, we will be agreeing and hopefully adopting a social summit declaration, which will be a very crucial communication from the event. The declaration is as balanced as possible, and we fully appreciate how mammoth of a task it has been for our colleagues in Portugal to bring so many views and advocacy points on board. What still worries us and our ETUC allies is the suggestion in the text of progressing towards bringing in structural reforms at the national level. Structural reforms have a strong austerity sound and almost synonymous with neoliberal policies and cuts. We need to avoid a throwback to the last round of austerity cuts, and the whole ethos of the EU recovery should be public investment and not stripping back investment. And therefore, we are still asking 2 days before the social summit, we're asking for a change in the text to aiming for structural changes and ambitious reforms, because we agree, together with ETUC, that this reaffirms that on the road to recovery, austerity measures are not brought in. We need investment and we need upward social convergence. Of course, we cannot allow that after Porto, member states hide behind the declaration and do not deliver on the targets. Member states need to be held accountable to turn the promises of the declaration and something that they signed up to and what the EU member states are asked to endorse at the Porto summit must be turned into action that leads to real positive changes for people. And we, a social platform, want to work with both EU institutions and social partners and with member states, like we have done with Portugal, not only as a holder of the EU Council presidency, but also as an EU member state. As I said in the beginning of today, as the European Commission encourages member states to set up national coordination mechanisms to ensure the engagement of all stakeholders in the implementation of the pillar, I want to once again reaffirm that our member networks are ready to engage in those mechanisms at the national level. We are one Europe and we need to work together, and the social pillar, action plan and its targets, and the social summit must aim high for a united one social Europe. And a question to quite a few member states: why, when we are talking about such an important thing that is ensuring that every single person in Europe can live their life in dignity, personally and professionally, play an active role in their communities, not to be put into categories, why is there still such a strong retreat to exclusive national competencies? Why do we hear that the social pillar and the action plan can only be an inspiration for national realities and should not encroach on national social models? For us, there should be a European social model where everyone is included, respected, treated as a human being, and not discriminated against. This is the universal social model we need across the European Union. So let us stop focusing on what cannot be done and focus what can be done. Everything has to go hand in hand. Economic, environmental, education, digital policies must all be interlinked and have social as the overarching guiding torch. Therefore, the time is now for the EU and member states to really take bold and decisive actions, demonstrating to people across Europe that they are fully committed to building a more resilient, socially just, and inclusive Europe that they want. So with these words, I say thank you very much to everyone. I wish you all a safe trip to Porto, to those who are going, but also to those who will be joining online. Let's make Porto and the Social Summit, as I said, the biggest event in our social justice event in our European calendar. So thank you very much once again to everyone.
Thank you very much, Piotr. And with that and with those inspiring words, we draw this conference to a close. There will be an evaluation form to get your feedback as participants on how this event has gone, and there will be a link posted in the chat, but you will also receive it by email at the end of this event. Thank you to everybody for participating. I'm sorry we couldn't get to all the questions that we had, but hopefully we've touched on a large number of the issues that are on our minds. And remember those expectations that we talked about at the beginning of this event, the expectations of an ambitious social Europe committed to by member states, and then actions taking place in partnership between all those concerned, all the different stakeholders, institutions at European, national, regional and local level. That's the ambition we have. So we look forward to working together for that And please stay tuned to social platforms through our website, through our newsletter, through working with our membership. And together we can continue to build the social Europe that we need to have. Thank you very much and enjoy the rest of your day. Bye.